2 years ago now, we conducted some listening sessions and surveys among staff members at the Dietrich School, asking about how we could improve communication among staff and throughout the school. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback we got was how difficult it was for folks who were working in different buildings or different schedules than their team members to maintain
Mhm.
consistent, accurate, clear communication. So we were happy
Mhm.
to partner with our friends in organization development, and Laura Ainsley is here to
Mhm.
walk us through some ways that we can get better at
Good.
communicating in hybrid teams. So, Laura, take it away.
Yeah, happy to be here and thanks for having me. And this is obviously um, a conversation that's been going on for a while. And I'll be curious to hear about your particular dilemmas as you experience them. I think back to, as much as you were talking about people in different buildings, and, we talk about hybrid and remote work and how that's become something that we've had to kind of grapple with and integrate into our work. I think back to 20 or so years ago when I worked for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. Are you familiar with that organization? They do the gardens. You see them when you come out of the Parkway West but they also do land conservation and they oversee Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. And I was in the education department at Falling Water. And I remember, so 20 years ago, this was the discussion, except it was a little bit different. How do we maintain communication? Because we have people at all of these different locations, and it's all very location dependent. I can't make the people at the different, watershed sites be in the same place as me at Falling Water. Both of those are very specific. So it's about how can we build structures and processes that work for us so that we can maintain the quality of our work and communicate as well. So I'm curious, before we even get started, what are you experience? What is your life like in terms of communication, your work life, and where are your pain points? I will take chats or unmutes at any point.
I mean, Laura, I can say
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
my team is in two different
Mhm.
buildings. We actually have one
Mhm.
team member who is working out of state right now. We have some folks who come into the office and some folks who work completely remotely. And I think that
Mhm.
one of the things that we miss is that, kind of incidental communication where you would run into
Mhm.
somebody in the hallway or,
Yes.
getting a cup of coffee in the office kitchenette and share
Mhm.
information. So it's been
Mhm.
tough to remember that you need to communicate more intentionally.
Yes, right. And that's a key idea and what we're going to be talking about um, this afternoon for the next whatever 45 minutes. And I think another, you're sharing information when you bump into people, but you're also building rapport and trust. And those are the kinds of, seeing people in their everyday environments. It's a little bit of a different thing. So, we need to think about how we do that differently. It's not, it's the kind of default way that we've done it for a long time, but there are different ways of doing it, right? So it's a matter of thinking about how we can apply those different things, to what we do. And I remember even, back when I worked for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, for example, we didn't even have Teams meetings. We didn't have Zoom. So when we did come together and we would have meetings, and this is just one example of one organization, we would make sure that once we got everybody together, we'd spend a full day together, and we would make that time count, and that would include a mixture of sharing out what people were doing, sharing information, but also a lot of listening. Making sure that everybody had a chance to speak and be heard and, that kind of For lack of a better word, team building that goes on in those kind of casual moments where there are discussions going on, ideas being shared, people coming together with shared, under shared questions of, of inquiry. So it's interesting as we think now, given the tools that we have, what are the options that we have for that? And it's important that we recognize that we do have options. There's not necessarily one right way to do things, but there's a good mindset to have behind it. But what that looks like in all of our different areas will vary. So we'll take a look at that, and I'm going to do the thing where I scooch everybody's picture down so I can move my slides around. And so our goal today is to explore. We're going to explore some practical strategies that we can use to strengthen your connections and build community within the hybrid work environment. And that includes, a recognition of the hybrid reality, where we are and what we're experiencing. I remember in the function that I have in organizational behavior and organization development, we explore this question a lot, especially around the pandemic. And I remember people asking me, so what do you think of hybrid learning and hybrid work? What do you think about it? And I think what the essence of that was, do you think we should have it or not? That kind of question. And I think it's important for all of us to move past that question because it's kind of like, what do you think of the internet? What do you think of cars? Because it's these are technologies, these are cultural movements that it's important for us to recognize and learn to work with as much as we can. And I think that's an important mindset to start with. Of course, building communication and trust. Trust is really the foundation of so much. Um, some specific strategies where practical tools and approaches, and then the unique role of supervisors in helping to shape this and set the tone. Let me ask this: is everybody in this group, are you supervisors? Are you what are you individual contributors? What are your roles? Carol, are you able to speak to that a little bit? Yeah.
Yes, we are a mixed group. So
Okay.
it's folks who supervise,
Mhm.
maybe folks who supervise supervisors, as
Mhm.
well as staff without supervisory
Okay.
responsibility.
Okay. So a good mixture of things. All of you, whether you are specifically people leaders or not, do have some ability to um, create the tone, set the tone, shape culture. And I always remind people of that no matter where you are, whether or not you're an identified, leader or manager, we can all take some responsibility for that. And as a result, it's not just the responsibility that we can take, but it's the the empowerment that we can pick up and own. And I think that that's really important for us to recognize too. So setting the tone, we can all help to do that and being intentional in that. So this reflection is what I had asked you a minute ago. What challenges have you experienced with hybrid work? And is there anything, maybe I'll ask you this, anything that's caught you off guard beyond what we've talked about? We talked about the kind of incidental, we don't run into people as naturally. Anything else that's caught you off guard or what you've noticed?
I mean, I think some of it is also when we're in the hybrid environment, and now you're meeting online with all of your staff who are all
Mhm.
over the place, is the level of comfort sometimes people are with sharing like personal, like and wanting to hear like the chit chat. Like there's that balance of trying to strike that with people's comfort levels, and then also with needing to get the work done in a defined amount of time where, because we're
Mhm.
not physically in person, I think that's been a real like challenging issue.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, trying to balance that sense of I'm in my office at home versus I
Yeah.
may or may not be wearing shoes. That versus yeah, the more formality. And at the same time, there, I think people sometimes try to do that because they don't necessarily have that elbow rubbing at the workplace too, where it's so big. You're right, it's a balance that has to be found. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else?
We have comments in the chat
Oh, I'm
as
sorry. You
well.
know what?
That's
I
okay.
am chat blind right now.
Oh,
So
that's all right.
for
Here,
whatever
I'm happy
reason,
to read that to you.
okay.
Communication challenges, lag time related to tech glitches, missed nonverbal cues.
Okay. All right, good. Yeah, the nonverbal cues. So we have to, it goes back to that intentionality. I think of Jordan right now, who couldn't join us because of his internet issues. But then I think of Jordan in the past, who in the past year has not been able to join us because of car issues. I think we've all had those kinds of, things come up as well. So, and then the lag times. And we'll talk about intentionality with, communicating about our communication, those kind of meta communications that need to happen about how we communicate that can solve so many problems at the outset when we are, kind of savvy enough to do it. And so let's talk more about that. So, little quiz for you. Which number belongs with each, do you think? And this will not be graded. So just take a look at it and then we'll go over it. So the number, I'm going to just kind of go through it. The number of employees who want flexible options, that's 87%. So then that goes back to that reality that the flexibility exists. Let's think about, how, and also that may look different for different people. People may want flexibility in time, flexibility in location. So that varies. And then the second one is 54% worry about missing out on important information when working remotely. So that speaks to those, gaps that you were talking about. Three times, remote workers are three times more likely to feel left out of important conversations. And then finally, 72% of teams report stronger relationships when hybrid practices are intentional. So hybrid work isn't necessarily the problem, but unintentional practices are, just as they would have been had my work in the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy prior to hybrid work, just as that would have been a problem if people hadn't been intentional about coming together at certain times, sharing information, and meeting each other in certain ways when we were there. So, the core challenge, we're going to look at first information discrepancies. So, unintentionally, the in office experience is often, you may overhear hallway conversations. It's those incidental things, the casual drop ins. We see body language and reactions. Spontaneous collaboration may happen, and you feel more in the loop, for the most part. For the remote experience, you may miss those informal updates. You may feel hesitant to interrupt via message. You don't know what the other person's doing because you can't see it. Limited to verbal communication only. And depends on the person. Collaboration requires scheduling, and you may wonder, am I missing something? Especially if there are people in the office and you're not in the office. But there's also, of course, unintended benefits too, or incidental benefits as well. I think of my own experience. My office is remote, but I come in a couple days of the week because I teach and I have programs on campus. So when I'm not able to, or when I'm not in person, I have this unprecedented ability to focus that I didn't have in my work environment because I have wonderful coworkers who are very lovely and share ideas at any time. And so now, yeah, we have to kind of just change the way we do it. So it's as much as we have these things we're missing, it's helpful to think about the positives too, not to mention the fact that I live an hour and 15 minutes away and I get all that time back in travel too. But as a kind of takeaway, from this slide, the quality of relationships in hybrid teams depends entirely on how intentional we are about creating connection. And that comes from Amy Edmondson. You may have read and seen her research that she's done through Harvard. She does a lot of research in the areas of psychological safety and work team effectiveness. So that leads us into thinking about um, communication, trust, and the idea of building psychological safety in our work environments. So, uh, recommended as that, should we need to stay consistent in our communication, follow through on commitments, respond predictably, to be transparent. We forget to do this, but it can be so easy to do, to share the why behind decisions and be open about constraints to the extent that we're able to, and vulnerability. Admit mistakes, ask for help, show you're human. I find this to be something that's a big obstacle for especially people who are newer to leadership. They don't want to admit that they don't know things. But people, we don't realize that people see us in a more uh, positive way when they see that we are willing to recognize what we don't know and look to subject matter experts outside themselves for those answers. So, for supervisors and for anyone, I would say assume positive intent. Um, we tend to use fundamental attribution error in our communications, and we fill in the blanks for things we don't know based on our interpretation, and often it's wrong. So, with supervisors, focus on outcomes, not keyboard activity. I remember talking to somebody at Pitt early on in the pandemic, and she was a manager having a hard time tracking her employees. And she said, I used to be able to see when they came in for the day and see when they left, and that's how I would know that they were doing their job. Well, of course, that led to a discussion of maybe we should change the measures by which we track people doing their job. It's about more about accurate outcomes rather than, how long they've been in their desk. And that's true for any situation. So for team members, if you work within a team, communicate proactively, make your work visible, show people what you're doing, reach out. And for everyone, clarify expectations explicitly. Don't assume that everybody understands things, make sure to ask for, if you have questions. And then for everybody, create space for both formal and informal connections to take place in a work meeting. I think about, you're talking about how to balance these things. I think about our department, and we have a small department of about 6 people in our particular work department in organization development. We have 2 meetings a week. Each is an hour. Monday is the events of the week. Everybody going through. We take the first 5 minutes, talk about the weekend, and then get in. We have to have somebody in charge of transitioning us into the topics. And then, excuse me. And then on Thursdays, we have a little bit of a longer kind of this is just what our department does, and it really works for us. Each person has a kind of an icebreaker question, like what are you looking forward to most in the spring, or a favorite, what's your favorite scary movie around Halloween, kind of thing. But and I gotta tell you, we just love that because we kind of get to know each other. It's comfortable, relaxed, and then for the rest of that meeting, that's our kind of problem solving meeting where we each, kind of bring different things. These are things I need to bring to the team to talk about. But it helps. It's a great foundation for trust. So that's about creating space for both formal and informal connection. So something to think about for your areas. What does being available mean in a hybrid environment? Because this is one of those opportunities for communicating around our communications. So, does it mean immediately responding to messages? And this varies by person too, by job type, job category, your role. Does it mean attending every meeting? Does it mean being online during specific hours? Does it mean camera on? Something else? And then, maybe think about what assumptions you maybe make about availability. And What assumptions might others make about you? And when have these assumptions caused friction? And what might be some opportunities to help to clarify those expectations? Does anybody experience friction or confusion around availability?
I'll say one thing that I experienced is we recently had a team member join our team who was entirely in person in their previous role.
Hmm.
And so working hybrid was completely new to him. And
Hmm.
I did find it a little bit challenging, kind of setting the parameters of what etiquette behind like being on Teams looks like, or if you want to get in contact with me, like sometimes you can send me a message, sometimes you can send me an email, sometimes you can request a call. Like there's just a variety of options. And so actually having to like verbalize those things that
Yeah.
are just
Mhm.
commonplace, like culture on our existing team was an interesting
Mhm.
exercise.
Right. Like you've established these norms and you kind of have to bring somebody up to speed on that sometimes about that. That's a good point. Thank you. What else? Anybody else have this come up?
I do think I've seen a
Mhm.
lot of where faculty think you're not
Mhm.
there physically, so they're not going to
Mhm.
reach out to you. They're going to reach out to the person who is in person. So that a
Mm.
little bit of a undue burden on the folks that are physically present. So that kind of being more
Uh,
intentional about reminding our faculty or constituents, we're still working, even if you don't see us, we're there and you can reach us at any time using,
mhm.
whatever, Teams, Zoom, make a meeting, whatever you want to do. But I think that's been a big issue, especially in, academic departments. I think that's been a challenge.
I understand. Yeah. Um, yeah, and it's hard some people have a hard time just certain people's nature, certain people, adjusting to these kind of shifts and, but I like how, you instead of becoming upset, although you may feel upset inside, you may feel frustrated, you may feel, but, um, but just saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm here to answer all your questions," and reminding them these are things you can do. And that's one thing that I think is a good kind of practice, communication practice in general, is reminding people using what's called positive action language. It comes from nonviolent communication. Positive, like instead of saying "don't do this," "don't bother this person," "don't do," but these are the times when you can reach out to me. I should be, for the most part, I should be available and will be happy to receive your call. You can do this and this and this. So reminding people what they can do is so helpful and so positive, and it helps to retain that relationship and your sanity. So, and then too, sometimes we have to, there are adjustments that are made on a practical level. I remember working with a group of a couple people, pandemic era, where we were forced to make a lot of these adjustments. And there was one faculty member who wanted to have, it was a requirement according to the faculty member that the assistant be there in person every day so that that person could receive faxes for the faculty member. Any thoughts as to how we may have adjusted that? So, yeah, maybe fax as a communication method might be something that we could shift, right? We don't necessarily need to invite submissions or whatever it was that they were getting via fax. That we have other forms of communication that allow for more flexibility. Of course, it's nice, to think, oh, I want my assistant there, front lines, whatever. But sometimes if you want to get the best quality assistant, you might want to be able to be flexible about a person that you know, maybe they're only part of the time and um, is still willing to keep you up to date, but just adjust the methods for that. And these are just kind of practical things. And unfortunately, often our people get feelings involved with it. They get frustrations and they take it out on the individuals, when there are practical answers that could bypass, right, kind of all of that. So I really appreciate your thoughts, you sharing your examples of that. So let's talk about the power of explicit agreements. So instead of making these assumptions, let's be clear about what our expectations and plans are. These are examples. These are not hard and fast rules. Perhaps you want to communicate this. This will vary from place to place. This can be communicated up front ahead of time. So email, let's respond within 24 hours. Let's plan on doing that, right? What if it's a Teams message, maybe 2 to 4 hours. Could vary by people. Maybe urgent. If it's something urgent, then you'll make a phone call, but maybe during certain hours, right? Maybe you have a group that has a need to collaborate a lot. So maybe you decide that you'll have team overlap time from 10 to 3 and flexible outside these hours. Um, Meetings are scheduled in that overlap time. So you're still having work time at other hours of the day. It's not like you're working fewer hours, but when that happens or what that looks like might be flexible. Meeting protocols can be something that can be communicated ahead of time too. And when I say ahead of time, it doesn't have to be before everybody knows each other. It could be kind of like now that we're going into 2026, this is a new thing where we want to make sure everybody understands this. Maybe kind of pick an pick a time on the calendar or a reason to re-communicate these things. And that's an opportunity. Let's look again as the new fiscal year begins. I really think it's important for us to have our cameras on in our team meetings as much as possible. Well, it's great if we send agendas 24 hours ahead because then we accommodate different kinds of learners. We know that people have things that they may want to add to the topics and then maybe share notes within 24 hours afterwards as a follow-up to solidify what was decided, that sort of thing. And then maybe you have agreements about office presence. This, of course, it is affected by flexible work agreements as well. But maybe, if it's something that's going to be required, but it may just be about something that needs to be communicated. So you could share a weekly schedule if you want, or ask people to share a schedule. This isn't a requirement, but this is just an example of what one group might do. Use calendar status, use your Outlook calendars to communicate with people, and try as much as possible to respect people's working preferences. This is, our era of work that we're in, and it does allow for a little bit of, movement or, and accommodation. Um, and it's good to express that. So these norms, it's important that these are co-created by the team, not imposed top down. People will be more they will more easily buy into things and feel more engaged in the process if they're able to contribute ideas. And even if not every idea is able to be implemented, you can still share. If you are a leader of the team, you can share. I heard some of your ideas that you want to do this. I heard some other ideas about this. You can always say something to the effect of, let's try this for now, see how it works, kind of pilot this approach, and then we'll reassess at the end of the year, see how it goes, whatever it is. But the idea of co-creation is something that you'll get a lot more buy-in. And now to the matter of, oh, I got my chats back somehow just now. So feel free to chat if you want. Okay, so creating information equity. So this is, to that point of making sure that everybody stays in the loop. This is good business practice in general. So it's good that we are doing this. For example, create systems of documenting decisions. You go through this process of making a decision and you have people weigh in. So if it's important enough to do this, it's also important enough to write down and memorialize this decision. Share it with people. That keeps people in the loop, but then that also is a way for you to go back and explain your decisions, down the road if needed. Um, I find that this is really helpful. Use a remote first mindset. Default to tools and practices that include remote workers, that include, shared docs, recordings. I saw you were recording the messages, even Zoom meetings. I have found, and I still see this practice happen where there may be two people in the office and five people on Zoom, and the two people who are in the office meet together in a conference room, and there's still a sense. Then you have the other five people on the big screen in the room kind of feeling. And there's this sense that there's an exclusion still. So if you have anybody or more than a couple people, right? If you have the majority of people on Zoom, it's good for everybody to be on Zoom because you're literally all occupying the same physical space. And it creates more of that sense of equity. If you find that if you're with people in person and something comes up that's impromptu and it's important, you can say, you know what, this is a good thing. Let's put a pin in this. Let's bring this to the team that we brought this up, that we discussed the beginnings of this. Let's message everybody, loop them in, and have a meeting about it so that, and again, that's good business practice, regardless of whether you are in physical offices that are different or partially remote. And then regular check-ins. It's good, especially if you're a supervisor, to have a list of different things going on, to check in with people. What have you heard about this? Follow up, and then you can gauge any information gaps that way. Um, So just then, oh, excuse me, ensuring that everybody stays in the loop. Um, this might look like um, if you don't know, if you're a team member, you don't know, I'm not sure I have the full context on this. Can someone just fill me in? So making sure this is a little bit of kind of managing up skill set where you're making sure you have what you need. You can pay it forward it this way too, in this way. If you learn something important, share it with your teammates who may have missed it and suggest some documentation. Can we capture this in a shared folder so that everybody can access it? So being an advocate for information sharing is helpful, including advocating for yourself. So, I mentioned earlier about building little structures to communicate. And here are some ideas for that. These are connection strategies. Um, so they may look depending on who needs to communicate, like it could be intentional one-on-ones, regular meetings that are predictable, not just for problems. Leader listens more than talks. That's really helpful. Team huddles, maybe a brief weekly 15-minute all team sync where everybody discusses. Leader listens to wins and challenges. Um, questions as well by creating kind of consistent touch point. Celebrate those milestones. Make sure you're continuing to build your team by celebrating the wins along the way. As I mentioned in the previous one, make sure that you have these kind of shared documents that people have access to so that you have this sense that everybody has the same information. And you may want to have, it depends on the type of work you do, anchor days, designated teams when people, excuse me, days when the team's in the office together to collaborate and build relationships. And in some groups, and I find myself doing this a lot lately, there are a lot of hybrid teams who maybe come in for an annual or a quarterly retreat day where they have meetings as well as opportunities to collaborate and team build. So. And then we talked about this with supervisors as well as anybody. People are taking cues from you about what matters. So you can be a person who can model that behavior. You can do that by sharing your calendar and your schedule. You can be transparent about when you're available. You can put that in your email. A lot of people do that. I'm actively responding to email during these times usually. But it varies a lot with people, as people's teaching schedules or it's gonna look a, it's going to look varied no matter what. Show vulnerability in meetings. It's okay to say, I don't know. What do you think? I'm concerned about this. I'm hesitant too. However, this is the way we need to move forward. In the meantime, ask for input in deciding. People will respect you more than you think when you ask for their advice and their input rather than always having the answers. And then, of course, avoid being mysteriously absent, announcing decisions without any context, and only praising in-office workers. We don't want to do that, and don't expect instant responses either, unless it's something that is, of course, an emergency and is communicated that way. Um, So more about setting the tone. We can create psychological safety, whether you are a leader or a manager, or just in the interactions we have around us. So that means creating a space where it's okay for people to make mistakes, to not know anything, for things to come up, and they don't have to be scolded for it, right? They have to feel okay to do that. And workplaces that have that element are going to be more productive. When someone raises a concern, thank them. Um, Keep asking, what am I missing? What else do we need to know? If you see tensions happening, address those kindly. And check your own biases. Am I making assumptions about remote workers or people in the office? Do I give more opportunities if I'm a supervisor to people that I happen to see in the hallway versus in a planned Zoom meeting? Am I measuring productivity by hours logged versus outcomes? Like my friend who had problems measuring employee behavior during the pandemic. So, and then for people who aren't leaders, a reminder that you have power too. I keep going back to that. We all have personal power that we can bring to the work that we do, and we can influence everyone around us. So communicate proactively. Don't wait to be asked. Offer updates, offer suggestions. Um, Say something like, would you like me to reach out to them and ask them, could I take care of that step for you? If stuck, reach out early. Clarify unclear requests, giving grace, assuming positive intent. We talked about that earlier. Don't always assume that people have ill intent because we don't know something. Ask those clarifying questions, extending empathy, excuse me. And then make your work visible too. You can share those updates proactively, update your calendar and your status, contribute, speak up, and then be a connector. Introduce people, um, check in on people, and then, celebrating other people's wins. So I think some key takeaways, and then we'll talk about what it might mean for your work, is that hybrid work requires intentionality. So we have to be more intentional about the ways we interact. And we can make our expectations explicit and clear. And we can do it kindly. And we can focus on information equity, making sure everybody has access. Remembering that everyone's responsibility is connection and starting small. We can do these with just small behaviors and an attitude of openness, and asking questions is always good. How is this working for you? What could we do differently? Um, so at this point, I'll open it up to you with regard to maybe some things that you might want to start doing, stop doing, conversations you want to have, and actually, I'm just going to stop sharing so that we can talk together for a few minutes. Did anything come up for you that you felt might be something you could apply to your work? What would that look like? Anything that we could talk about?
I like the idea of setting ground rules, Laura, and
Mhm.
having people kind
Mhm.
of weigh in on that and what's a reasonable response time
Mhm.
or whatever. I think that, in
Mhm.
the example that Bryce brought up about having a new employee, it's like being able to reiterate what our expectations are of each other is a way to ensure that we're all reminded about that on a regular
Mhm.
basis.
Thanks. Yeah, it really creates a common language, a common way of behaving. And because we have to be more intentional about things, think about it, for decades and decades, people worked a certain way and there were norms that were created. So we're creating new norms. Yeah, like, Bryce used that example of I have to kind of explain the way we do things to people and what the options are. And I think, yeah, it's important for us to recognize that we can and should communicate about how we communicate. What else?
Yeah, I would agree with Carol that the ground rules, and I'm not sure if everybody can hear me, work really well,
Yeah.
except sometimes when you're in isolation,
Yeah.
which we all find, I think, find ourselves, even if we're at work. We could be there on a Friday afternoon and
Yeah.
walk and the lights suddenly click on because,
I've been there,
who
yeah.
knows when the last person has been there. And so you could see yourself spiraling though without those touch points, without those kind of reliable touch points and diverse touch points. And sometimes you need not just direct your questions or your assertions or things you want to share with your manager. You may want to try them on to size for someone who
Hmm.
a trusted ally or trusted partner that you can reach out to. But I think people feel sometimes like um, they don't want to bother people or they want to
Hmm.
engage people in work that may not be as important to them as it might be to you. So again, you kind of maybe your frustration or your anxiety is heightened because of that. I remember going in back in pandemic times, we never had to worry about touching base. We touched base every day, multiple times a day, because there was always an emergency. There was always an issue. But now we've kind of um,
Hmm.
retreated in some ways collectively, which is good. And again, I support completely. There's that less certainty that you'll have those connections and that they'll be sustained.
Hmm.
So you have to work at it.
So, yeah, so how do you, yeah, how have any of you been able to find ways to keep those bridges built, or something you have to kind of keep doing day to day? One thing I can say is that when I have a close colleague, um, Kelly Harden, who I work with, I don't know if anybody knows her. She works with the FSDP program. And whenever she'll call me sometimes over Teams and she'll say, or maybe ahead of time, she'll say, do you have time for a, 15-minute call? I want to hear your opinion on something. And I just know I respect her as a colleague. And when someone asks my opinion, I'm grateful that somebody's asking my opinion. I'm grateful that they see me as somebody who they appreciate my input. And I'm also happy to help. I'm motivated to help. And I think a lot of people are motivated. Real research shows that people are motivated to help people one way or another. I mean, that we feel motivated by that. So usually if we are asked, so I think that's something that's helpful to, I always try to remind myself when I'm hesitant to reach out to people that they, even though they may go out of their way, they appreciate the opportunity. Um, Anything else come up?
One thing I'm thinking of is I work in an office where nobody is completely remote. So everybody comes in at least one day a week. Most people, it is one day. But like I'm just thinking about the different experiences people might have on their in-person day, depending on what the group is like. And I say this because even on days aren't my official every week I'm in person, I've made it a
Mhm.
point to come in every day. And like the Friday group is a really tight-knit group. They're always chatting. People
Yeah.
go out for
Hmm.
coffee and come back. And then like Wednesday is probably the least populated day. And it's I mean, there are maybe five people who are regularly in, and we have an office, where some days you might have like 12, 13 people. And particularly, I noticed on Wednesday we have a newer advisor, and I'm wondering what her experience is like when you walk in and it's really quiet, and
Mhm.
heaven forbid someone's taken a day off who's normally in. And,
Yeah.
like I think I tend to think of this as what's it like across the board for everyone, but it really could be a different experience depending
Mhm.
on the in-person team that people are experiencing.
Mhm. And are there other opportunities that come up where like there might be a meeting that might bring the fun people in, the Friday people in, like let's all collaborate on this. Are could we be intentional about that too, I wonder, with whether it's cross-functional projects, meetings, brainstorming sessions. So these are sometimes opportunities to get those good heads together in a productive way that might also lead to some bonding opportunities. Because I know it's hard. I work in Craig Hall, which is feels like Siberia compared to, the rest of the campus. And I'll go in and the lights come on in the hallway kind of thing. But then I'll go to other spaces, other buildings, and it'll be fully alive, and, it just really depends on. So it's, I can see what you mean about it varying and you want to keep people on board. You want to retain good employees that you like, and you want to make sure that they know we have fun here too. And so yeah, so maybe so what I'm saying is I'm wondering if there are intentional opportunities that we could get those people in, the Friday people in on Wednesdays for something or vice versa. I don't know, but I know what you mean. Anything else come to mind right now? I'm enjoying looking at all your seasons in the background. You're representing all the seasons, and that's so nice to see. I know that I am personally going to go try to take a walk this afternoon during my lunch break right now and get out and get, some fresh air. And so I encourage all of you to do that too. So yeah, I think it's important for all of us to continue, of course. I always feel like I need to advocate for this. And I do this with all the groups. So remember to take care of yourself, because all those that, your ability to maintain yourself physically, emotionally, whatever it is that you need to show up for the people around you makes all the difference. So thanks for bringing all the seasons to me today. And I'm so glad to have the opportunity to work with you. It was a nice cascading series of events that brought us together. So thank you.
Laura, thank
Mhm.
you so much for your
Yeah.
time. It was,
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
this presentation was really, really helpful and has hit on a lot of the things that I think are shared concerns. And
Mhm.
I mean, it's certainly given me a lot to think
Mhm.
about and some things to consider about how to implement. So
Yeah, be
I
creative.
really
Hmm.
appreciate that.
Hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, it was so nice to meet you all, and I hope to work with you again sometime soon. All right, take good care.
Awesome.
Yeah, think how you can be creative with these things. It's up to you to apply it. So good. Okay,
Excellent.
take care. Bye bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Bye.
Laura.